But yeah, my undergrad was at USD in chemistry and business management with a double minor in French and International Studies. I would have loved to have done the anthropology degree if I could, but I didn't. And then I recently just finished my master's in urban and regional planning at the University of Central Florida in Orlando, where we learned GIS, and I was excited to do some mapping, and I was like, this is going to be one of my first projects. But just to tell you a little background, so in addition to the Bear Butte Creek Historic Preserve Board, I'm also on the board of the Sturgis and Meade County Historical Society. We're the newest historical society, I think, in the Black Hills. We've been around about 12 years, maybe 15 years. Versus Butte County, that's I think 55 years, or Deadwood, which is like 130 or something. And we don't have a permanent home yet, but we are collecting a number of documents and artifacts and whatnot. And recently we inherited Faith's collection of historical artifacts and documents because I guess they've closed their little museum out in Faith. Faith is in Meade County, 101 miles from Sturgis. So it's a big county and there's a lot of history, but Sturgis being the county seat's at one little corner. So anyway, this little project that I put together and actually launched just this week is to put historic plaques on all the buildings, homes and office buildings in Sturgis that are 100 years old or older. The inspiration for doing that, am I on your video? Should I move over?
Yes.
Make sure it's great. Okay. In Orlando, where we live most of the year, we just spend summers back in Sturgis. I live in a historic district, if you can believe that Orlando has historic districts. But we do, and the streets are all paved with bricks, and all the houses are mostly 1920s craftsman bungalows. And my house was built in 1923. We just celebrated our centennial, and we threw a big roaring 20s party. We literally had like 150 people.
Wow.
All the neighbors came, everyone dressed up. One of the neighbors had a Model A Ford that parked in the driveway. We knew of a jazz saxophonist in the neighborhood, and he came and played. We went all out, and we got a certificate from the city with our celebrating our centennial. And so I've been involved with this little project in my neighborhood, getting these little plaques put on everybody's houses. So I had some good experience doing this. And in Orlando, we're in Orange County, Florida, and we have a good online GIS system, and you can just go in and pull up information with the year built for each house. So I thought, oh, I'm just gonna log on to the Meade County one. I'll download the year built file and I'll plug it into one of my GIS mapping tools, and voila, I'll have my list of the years built. I'll be able to map it, and we'll figure out how many buildings there are. We weren't sure if we would choose 100 years old or something more or less, because we didn't know exactly how many there were. So I get online to the online GIS system. They don't have a year built field. So I start working with folks with Meade County, and they're like, well, we have some of that information. It is online, but it's not in a database. It's in an image file. A layout of each house, and some of them have the year built written on it. So I was going to show you how I went through this process that was pretty maddening, and sort of describe our whole little project. But this was my inspiration back in Orlando, Florida, with our little historic year-built plaques. So what I proposed to our little historical society was to do our own plaques for any property. And I thought 100 years old seemed like a good target, but I didn't have any data to back it up yet. But that was my initial target. The benefits were to raise awareness of historic structures in Sturgis, to pique the interest of residents and visitors regarding the history of Sturgis. And I know that Plaques do these things because I have seen it happen in my Orlando neighborhood. The more of our houses got these plaques, the more people started to take interest in the history of their house. My house doesn't have a plaque. I wonder what year it was built. And they'd start digging and find it and get their plaque. And then we have a lot of visitors in our neighborhood. Even though we're not next to Disney World, we still get visitors. And they start walking along the street and see these signs. You just can't help but notice them after you pass a few houses. Oh, this one was built in 1910. Oh, this one was built in 1921. This one was 1920. And you start to really look and appreciate each of the houses, especially houses. And then finally, and this is my little kind of sneaky dream, is that maybe this will encourage other forms of historic preservation. It's Sturgis, it's West River. We are not going to be imposing a historic district anytime soon. But my hope is that maybe a few of our streets, if a lot of people put up a plaque and they start talking and they start realizing that, wow, Pine Street in Sturgis or Fulton Street in Sturgis has a lot of houses that are over 100 years old. And boy, we just lost one last year. It was torn down and replaced with some new place. Maybe we should do something to protect that historic nature of our street or our district or neighborhood or the town. So that's my hopeful longer term goal, is that this will spark some interest in actual historic preservation. And it's gotta come from residents. That's definitely something else I've learned in Orlando, being involved with we have 6 historic districts in Orlando, and it's gotta come from the residents. It can never be pushed down from on top from a city or whoever. So that's one of my hoped for long-term benefits. So process, we went through and looked at a number of different plaque styles. Our board, debated that and what they should look like, and how we can assist in determining those years that were built. That's where my data analysis came into play. And now we're to the third phase of our little project, communicating this to the property owners. But first, how did I get that data? I went online to Meade County's GIS system, which is Beacon, and they, for the public, that's a very good question, and I apologize. I used a piece of jargon, GIS, that all the people who work here know, but the rest of us probably didn't know. GIS is a geographical information system. It's basically online mapping. And professionals in development, developers, land developers, urban planners, archaeologists, meteorologists, everyone who's doing anything spatially with maps today is using a GIS system. Thank you for asking. I apologize for not explaining that earlier. But so this is Meade County's, and it's got all of our properties in the whole county on this system.
Oh, yes.
It is open to the public for free.
Yes.
There are certain features, though, you need an account for, and for like a professional property developer or real estate agent, they would pay for an account. The folks at the county gave me a free account so I could do this research, and they were great to work with and had no problems with me doing that. So I bring this up, and I decided to do it by street. So I come here to the address search and I put in a street name like Davenport or Lozelle or Junction, if you're familiar with streets in Sturgis. And what I get would be a list of those properties. This one was Sly Street. There aren't that many properties on that street. And then we had their parcel ID, which you can see is a hyperlink where there's a file behind there with more information. But what we don't see here is any information about who owns that parcel, or there's no year built, right? So I would download this in an Excel file. I'd insert a column, and then I'd come back here and I'd click on one of these, and it would bring up the full little report on that property, and it's got, you know, some cool information. There was almost, probably 80% of the time a photo, which was really helpful, and that made it fun because I could picture these places, you know, as I would go through the streets. This one, 924 Sly Street, you can see is kind of, it looks like an older house, right? But I wasn't sure, so I'd scroll down, and there was an image, a sketch with the floor plan of that building, that house. And this one was a good one. It had the year, built 1938. In an image, which if you've done anything with data, there are ways to harvest information from an image using, what's it called? Optical character recognition. I didn't have an optical character recognition program. That was way beyond me. So I brought this up, and do you have trouble seeing this from where you're sitting? I had trouble seeing this when it was right in front of me too. So I actually blew up my resolution on my web browser to like 200%. So I'd come through it. These were all giant letters. And I'd scroll down, but I could then see the image and catch that year built. And I'd plop that next to the address and the parcel number in my Excel spreadsheet. And I did that 2,990 times. That's how many properties there are in Sturgis. I did not do it for Piedmont or Faith or Blackhawk or Union Center or any other town in Meade County. And I don't really want to do any of those others. But if some of those communities come forward wanting to participate and have their own town's year-built plaque, I'll help them. But and that was another challenge. The county database is for the whole county. So when I did Main Street, it brought up Main Street, Piedmont, Main Street, Faith, Main Street, Somerset, Main Street, there's not a Somerset, Main Street, but you know, it's a mixed database with all communities. So some of the streets, like 3rd Street or 1st Street or something, every little town had one of those. So I had to weed that out. And there was ways you began to look at the data and I could tell based on the numbering of the parcels if it was a Sturgis one or a Fort Meade one or a Elm Springs one or somewhere out there. So I learned a lot from this whole data analysis. What I learned was out of the 2,990 properties, 2,098 had a date. So roughly 2/3. There's still about 1,000 properties out there that I don't know what the year built was. A lot of them are newer, so I know they're probably not in that 100-year-old target category. 167 of these properties were empty lots, so there was no building to date. This raises some other interesting questions in my mind when we have a big affordable housing shortage in the Black Hills. I'm like, why are there 167 lots that are empty in the middle of Sturgis? But anyway, so that left, there were 725 with no date. Of those, there were 345 that were 100 years old or older, built in 1925 or earlier. I was like, wow, that's quite a few. And I know there's more Cause I only got 2/3 of the buildings with year builds. So that was pretty good, and I did a little graph over here, so about 16% of my properties are gonna fit into this historic category as I'm defining it, as 100 years old or older. We all on the board thought that sounded like a reasonable year to cut that off at. So then I plugged it in, and a good scientist would have taken better notes. I don't know how I got here. I could not reproduce this. I thought Esri, the company that makes the big fancy GIS mapping system called ArcGIS, had a free online version. They don't really. So I plugged it into a few other things. One was called Felt, and I got a result, but it didn't have everything I wanted. So I took that, saved it as whatever file type, plugged it into another site. I don't think I could reproduce it. I should have written down notes. I could do these ones so many times because I did this 2009 already. So I totally remember, how I got all that information in my Excel spreadsheet. And that was honestly the more important part, was my Excel spreadsheet. By the way, I brought a copy of that if you do wanna look at that at all. I can pass it around. And I've transformed it into my ordering form, which I'll talk about in just a little bit, but you can see the basics of that spreadsheet. So I still wanted a map. I love maps. The whole goal was to use mapping software. So I went ahead and I plugged in to whatever system I found and got a map. And it was right. It was what I was going for. And as you can see, Sturgis, it's kind of hard to see, but Sturgis comes out here on both the east and west side of I-90 and over here and up here and down, and there's a big area over here. Obviously, the historic homes are concentrated where I thought they would be. Here is Main Street right there and our old part of our town in this little area. I was actually surprised, well, I guess I'm not completely surprised there were some over here. There were a few outliers. This is a little ranch home that's over 100 years old here. There's one up here, the Roth family. If you're from the area, you've probably heard of the Roths. This one is interesting. All of these dots are in the center of a lot, a parcel. Most of the parcels are exactly the same, about the same size as this dot. This one, the home, is actually right up here on Highway 14A that goes up to Deadwood. But the parcel is about this big, and so the dot was in the center. So that I originally was gonna fill in the whole parcel with a color, but it really skewed my results. So I decided to go with a dot in the center of each parcel, and that was more representative, I think. Except for that one. It was kind of a funny outlier, because this is like up in the mountains, Black Hills National Forest. Then I added a color-coded gradient so you could see the distribution of those. The darker the color, the older the building. And so we can see that they are really concentrated down here in the older part of the town. Sturgis was founded in 1878, the same year that Fort Meade was built. Sturgis is here because of Fort Meade. We were called Scoop Town. Has everyone heard the Scoop Town story? And our mascot, we're still the Scoopers.
Shovel.
Scooped, yeah, we have a shovel. Mascot. And Scooper Sam looks really similar to the Nebraska Cornhusker guy, but he's got a shovel and is dressed in black and white. So, but yeah, the people who lived in Scoop Town, people like Poker Alice, scooped the pockets of the soldiers from Fort Meade when they get their paycheck. they'd come into town to the bars and brothels and other places and blow their paycheck. So this was really interesting, I thought. It was also kind of interesting to see some of the outliers. I did this for all of the properties built since 1925 as well. And I don't think I included that, but that was also really interesting because you would see that maybe a whole neighborhood, like right here off of Ballpark Road, was all built in the 1960s.
Yeah.
And then we have a neighborhood over here called Murray Addition, and it was all built in the 1970s. And then there's a new one over here, Vernon Heights. It was all built in the 2000s. And then there's a whole brand new one here that was all 2010s. And it was really fascinating to see how you could see the growth of the town over the 150-year history, just in my color-coded map. And I do have a picture of that too, but for this purpose, I'm only interested in the 100-year-old houses and buildings. So that was fun. And you can see, this is one I generated with felt data from OpenStreetMap. That's where I got my, for those of you who do this GIS mapping, that's where I got my vector codes that actually draws out the parcel and plots these locations in the correct spot. So, some of the other things I learned from my analysis, the two oldest buildings that are on record in our county system were both built in 1884. One is a house on Spruce Street, and it looks like a house from the 1880s, right? It's got the wraparound porch, it's actually brick, it's pretty cool. Maybe could be cleaned up a little bit, I don't know. And then one of our Main Street buildings, which currently houses Sturgis Photo and Gifts, run by longtime resident Bob Davis, who passed away a few years ago. This was a real ironic, maybe not ironic, a coincidental situation because it's Sturgis Photo and Gifts who I've partnered with to sell these historic plaques that we're pushing out onto the residents of Sturgis. And as part of the program to get them to do it, we bought them their plaque. Because they are one of the two oldest buildings from 1884. There may be older buildings, but they aren't in Meade County's records. So what I told the owner of Sturgis Photo and Gifts and some of his workers is that if a resident comes in and they know that their house was built in 1880, they've got the deed and everything, we'll honor that because they have better information than our county does. So that's totally fine. I did a little distribution. And this one is over the entire time history of Sturgis. I was kind of curious, were there boom and bust cycles throughout the history of Sturgis? And this probably mirrors some of the other Black Hills towns as well. Now, one caveat, this isn't completely indicative of all the buildings built by decade because many of them are no longer there. These are the ones that are still standing. But you can kind of still get a good picture of how many buildings were built in the 1880s, about 25, 1890s, there were about 30, and then in the 1900s, between 1900 and 1910, we started to really kind of grow. There's still almost 100 buildings around just from that era. And then the 19-teens, again, there's still about 100 buildings left from that period. Roaring 20s, right? Lots of homes built, still around. Great Depression, I was expecting this to drop off in the 1930s. We still have a lot of houses that were built and are still standing from the 1930s in Sturgis. That was a surprise to me. I didn't expect that, because across most of the country, there weren't a lot of things built in the 1930s. And then, of course, post-war, boom, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, lots of houses built, and of course, most of them are still standing. Then my data goes wonky. Remember I said I did 2,990 buildings, but only about 2,000 had data. So a lot of the ones that don't have data are from this more modern period. For whatever reasons, those records haven't made it onto Meade County's GIS system. They say that they do have paper files for some of these. It's one thing to sit at my computer in Florida, because this took probably 50 hours of my time to go through and do all this. I wasn't going to go to the courthouse and sit and dig through paper files this summer. So there were definitely more homes built in the 1980s than what my data shows. But it's not online, so it's in paper and some filing cabinet. Hopefully there's no fire. And then we've kind of had a little bit more of a boom in recent years again. But really interesting stuff. Oh, I did put together the whole map of all the buildings in Sturgis. So that's gradiated from 1884 right up to 2025. And you can see the newest areas are in yellow, and then the oldest areas are this dark purple. So that was really interesting to me. It's also spatially interesting. Here, this addition is called Pinecone Estates. They're little acreages. You can see the low density for anyone interested in urban planning. Whereas we've got good density here, very walkable neighborhoods. Ain't nobody walking from up here or out here. You've got to get in a car to drive to get anywhere from those spots. Or down here, that's suburbia. So that was interesting as well. So how did we decide what our plaque should look like? Well, we had a number of characteristics we wanted. We wanted it to be the same for both houses and businesses, to be uniform. We wanted it about a foot across, something that would be visible from the street, whether you were walking on a sidewalk or driving in a car. We decided we wanted it to say Historic Sturgis. So people got the idea right away, okay, this is something to do with history. The year built was the most important piece of information, so we wanted that big in the center. We also wanted people to know this was a project of our Sturgis and Meade County Historical Society, so that is in fine print at the bottom. And most importantly, this is the Black Hills and this is Sturgis, it needed to be affordable. My first ones I looked at were running about $300 each. And those were like the little cast aluminum ones, like the one I have in Orlando, except our manufacturer was about 8 blocks away, right there. And ours sold for about about $95. So we could get a nice one, but pretty affordably. At $300, I said, there are gonna not be many people in Sturgis that are gonna do this. So I shopped around, definitely no one in Sturgis is making it. Come to Rapid. Finally, I did find Rosenbaum's signs up Deadwood Avenue that make outdoor plaques. They're not a cast aluminum product. They're an interesting composite material that have sort of a sheet of like aluminum over them. Or no, it's more than aluminum. It's some other kind of pretty tough metal with sort of a polymer behind it. But it's the stuff that they put on sides of gas stations for their signage and other spots. So I'm like, okay, this sounds pretty durable. And they could do it for as cheap as $52. That was if we got a big order. If we were to just do a one-off, it's gonna be more like $72. So this was a little perplexing for me. I'm like, okay, I gotta land on a uniform amount. So we set it at $75 for the plaque. I wanted to make sure that Sturgis Photo and Gifts can cover their costs of processing an order, because that's where people are ordered. Of course, people from Sturgis are in Rapid all the time. You could go to Rosenbaum Signs, but I'm like, that really decreases the odds of people buying these plaques, I think. There needs to be an order point and pickup point in Sturgis. And so Sturgis Photo and Gifts agreed to do that, and that's, I think, gonna be perfect. This is our plaque. This is what we decided on.
Nice.
It looks like it's cast aluminum with kind of a rough surface, but it's actually a flat printed surface. And it's a little cleaned up from, I know it's a little fuzzy on this graphic, but we kind of decided to go with this design because our logo for the Sturgis and Meade County Historical Society is sort of that same shape. It looked different enough from most people's house number plates, because obviously you're gonna have your house numbers on your house too, and so we wanted it to look a little different than that. But we've got Historic Sturgis built, the year in big bold font, and then Sturgis and Meade County Historical Society at the bottom. For $75, I think that's pretty reasonable. And so now begins our process of getting the word out. So there's several aspects of this project. We had to do that data research first. We had to figure out, what do we want the sign to actually look like? Do we want it for buildings 100 years old and older? Yes, that's what we want. Okay, got all that decided, got a sign made, got a distributor. Now comes the harder part, and that's getting the word out. And I don't know if you noticed, but I put together sort of instructions for the workers there at Sturgis Photo and Gifts, so they can kind of sell it. I've made some posters for them to put in their window. They have a sample sign there. And then I do a lot of PR for the nonprofit groups I'm in, and we hold our annual History Day in Sturgis, so I already kind of had a PR plan. So to get the word out, we have a little display at our annual History Day. We have a quarterly newsletter we send out to our email distribution list with a couple hundred people on that. And we can use just a regular email as well. I'm gonna be sending press releases to the Black Hills Pioneer, the Journal, KBHB Radio. I'll probably send them to all of them, maybe the TV stations too, South Dakota Public Broadcasting. You just never know who's gonna pick it up. So, and it's easy. Once you've written one press release, it's easy to send it out to a whole bunch of different groups. So I'm gonna be doing that. Word of mouth, of course, is important. Our board has about 15 members, and I'm gonna ask them to, start spreading the word to their friends and neighbors in Sturgis. That's kind of phase one, the easy mass communications stuff. Next, then we start to kind of get into the weeds. I'm gonna kind of wait and see how many orders we get, but from there, I think what I want is a street sponsor. So if I know that there's someone living on Spruce Street who is really interested in this, maybe they'd be willing to go door to door in their neighborhood. If I give them a list of the historic homes on their street, maybe they'll go and talk to their neighbors. I might also need to print out a letter, and here's where I have to start spending money. This stuff's all free. It's great. But if worst comes to worst, I might need to print a letter on paper, and maybe I can get my street sponsor or block captain or whatever I end up calling them to walk it door to door and leave a paper letter on everyone's door. I really want to avoid mailing it because there goes more costs that I don't really have from our group. But that is a possibility, is doing a mailing. We can go around and do presentations at the Chamber of Commerce meetings or City Council meetings. And then I've got my posters at Sturgis Photo and Gifts. So I think I can get the word out. I know from experience in Orlando, we've been doing this for like 30 years. And we're up to probably 85% of our houses having a plaque. It didn't start that way. It started with maybe a third of the houses got the plaque. And that's what I've told my board and I've told Sturgis Photo and Gifts. This is an ongoing project. We'll get hopefully a good round here at first of people who choose to put up the plaque. But then, we'll need to keep pushing every year. And as more plaques get put up, other people will see them and be like, well, I want one on my house. My house is 100 years old. So, and maybe the current homeowner doesn't want one. They're not interested in it. But maybe in a few years, there'll be a new homeowner that is interested in their history. My house was like that in Orlando. It didn't have a plaque. And I'm like, I want a plaque. And so that was why I got it going again down there. And yeah, that's going to be an ongoing thing. Plus, each year, there's going to be about a dozen new houses that will turn 100. And that might be reasonable to mail them a letter. If it's only a dozen or so every year who turn 100, that's kind of fun. You send the congratulations, your house is turning 100 this year. You now qualify to buy a plaque for your house. So, and they might be a little more expensive in future years because I won't have a big mass of them being ordered. It'll only be a few at a time. But I'm hoping with these 350 right now, hopefully we can get, maybe 100 of them to order this year. So that's my little project. Definitely history related, definitely historical society related. I don't know how archaeologically related that was, but do you have any questions for me? Yeah, Katie.
I was wondering, have you ever thought about reaching out to the Sturgis High School welding program about putting together signs? Mostly because in the past, Belle Fourche has made the Belle Fourche welding program put things together for flag poles and stuff like that. But maybe in the future when you're not ordering, a whole handful of signs, it might be a great project for even just the local community to.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We have talked about doing things like that with them. A lot of those groups already have a thing like that they do. I've found that we just don't have the best of luck. It really depends on who the instructor is.
Got it. Okay.
At the time. But yeah, we used to have a wood shop instructor who did a project where you made a wooden varnished house sign with your family's name on it. And you'll see them all over Sturgis still from like the 80s and 90s because that instructor did that for that time period. And then he retired and they stopped doing it. So. But yeah, no, that's a good call out. Yeah. Fidel.
Did you have as you were going with your research, ever in the process, did you find any of the houses that were in your database were NRHP or state registered?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, so were any of the
I
houses?
have plaques for those houses too.
Right. Existing plaques for. We do have a couple buildings in Sturgis that are National Register of Historic Places. Of course, all Fort Meade is pretty much. Those buildings, some of them do. There aren't that many. I actually did a story in our last newsletter on that. I think we have 35 buildings in the whole county that are on the National Register, not including, I mean, Fort Meade counted as one.
Yeah.
Because the whole fort is, but, and then there was about 6 that were on the state register in the whole county.
Those are registered, not like eligible.
Right, several of them that were in Sturgis were also 100 years old. For instance, I think the Annie Talent House in Sturgis, I think was one of them that was on the National Register. And it's over 100 years old, so it'll qualify for my little plaque. One of them, this is really interesting, I didn't know this. So the Poker Alice House is over 100 years old, it should get a plaque. It used to be on the National Register of Historic Places, and then they moved it. They moved it from North Junction Avenue, right by Bear Butte Creek, to South Junction Avenue, and the state delisted it because that violated too much of the historic integrity, and so it's no longer on the National Register. But, and then we also have a separate program in Sturgis for some of our Main Street businesses where they're putting together a interpretive plaque that's about the size of a sheet of paper, 8 by 10 or so, that'll have not only the year built, but this was the original business that was in this building, it was called this, here's a paragraph of information, here's maybe an old photo of the building. That's also going on right now in Sturgis. And then one of our future projects is to put big interpretive historic plaques, kind of like you would see in Deadwood, saying, hey, this whole block of Main Street or this building was this, and here's a whole write-up of the information with multiple photos. And,
that's expensive.
that gets expensive. Yeah, you can only really do so much of those. We don't have that nice Deadwood gaming money, although they do fund things like that all over the Black Hills. We probably could get it paid for if we applied to them to do that. We've done that with our Nolan Monument. That's that sort of rock obelisk by our hospital. There was a pony mail carrier killed nearby there. And we have some nice interpretive plaques that are, 2 feet by 3 feet that are there. And then we're also installing some at our Bear Butte Creek Historic Preserve to tell the story of Soapsuds Row and the firing range from the fort that was there and some other things. But yeah, so there's multiple plaques, and sometimes it gets a little confusing, especially because right now we're also doing this Main Street Business plaque, which we're also helping with our historical society. I wanted to keep this simple and maybe a little more residential focused. Other questions or comments? Yeah, Alec?
Yeah, I had one or a few that might kind of tie it more to archaeology.
Okay.
Did you get a better sense of the sort of like transition between different architectural styles locally doing this project?
Yeah, totally. So that's something else that I want to do. Is I have some architecture background too, the urban planning that is involved with that. And with every neighborhood and the era they were built also came a certain building style. And you can totally see that. Houses that were built in the 19-teens tend to be the craftsman ones. Ones that were 1890s were maybe Victorian. We're starting to see across the US a recognition of mid-century modern houses. And we have some really nice examples that were built in the 50s and early 60s in Sturgis of mid-century modern. And of course, a lot of people are like, well, that's not old, but everything that is old was once new.
Yeah.
And that's especially true with architecture.
You can
And-
probably pull apart the Sears Roebuck houses.
Yeah, we have several Sears houses, yep. So yeah, that's something, we have our Sturgis Area Arts Council that has done some things like that for historic homes, but I'd like to work with them, we do a lot together, the Historical Society and the Arts Council. And I'd like to work on a walking tour brochure on architectural styles, which obviously is gonna be mostly historic, but there's gonna be things right up to the current day too, that would be in a tour like that. And you also saw that in building materials, which definitely relates back to archaeology. Sandstone, that was one of the best building materials of, that they chose in those 1870s, 1880s, 1890s buildings. And then, I don't know the history, but at some point about the turn of the century, they kind of stopped the quarrying of sandstone around the Black Hills. And some of our buildings then were built in brick, especially Main Street buildings are sandstone and brick, and some houses. And then brick kind of falls out of favor and it turns to stick built, to wooden houses.
Yeah, we actually had a presentation, Rose gave a presentation on local brick manufacturing.
Cool, oh neat, yeah.
I think, weren't you saying, Tom, that there was a building in
Piedmont, yeah, that was
built
one
of
Rose
Yeah,
had studied.
Yeah,
Well,
actually,
bricks are great, bricks are so dateable.
so,
Yeah,
You
the
know,
planks
They're
there.
great. And and I don't know, maybe Katie studied some of this, but stone, they weren't manufactured in a plant the way brick was. But now we're so much better at chemically identifying stone types that we can tell exactly which quarry, stone came from. Of course, around here, we kind of already knew if it's the red sandstone or the yellow sandstone, or we kind of knew
There's
already.
even research projects that go back into like Neolithic construction. Like they say from certain analyses that the stones over at Stonehenge were all the way from up north in Scotland,
Yeah.
not all the way down. So that kind of data is like still relatively new, but it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, how does that compare, how do the architectural styles and transitions between them here compare to what you see in Orlando?
That's really funny. That's so funny. Sturgis is older than Orlando, Florida, for the most part. We have more historic buildings. And of course, Orlando's just 2 hours away from St. Augustine, our oldest
Oh, yeah.
European settlement in the continental US. That's all there was in Florida for about 300 years. St. Augustine and Pensacola. Until air conditioning came along, nobody really lived in Florida. So we only have literally a handful of Victorian homes in Orlando. And a lot of our houses, so Orlando's history is interesting. There was a big Florida land boom in the 1920s when the orange industry really got going. And so we have a lot of houses and buildings built in the 1920s. And they were using mostly the arts and crafts style, the craftsman style, which was already about 20 years old in the 1920s. But it was really popular down there. The front porches were essential down there, before air conditioning. And of course, Orlando was a smaller town. It was still bigger than, it was about the size of Sioux Falls today when Disney opened in 1971. And now we have 2.6 million.
Wow.
Yikes.
We have twice as many people in Orange County as all of South Dakota. But our little community downtown Orlando is still really small. There's only so many old houses. And we've done a good job, I think, preserving what we have. We don't really have a lot, but it's fascinating. I see older houses in Sturgis that are older than anything really we have in Orlando all the time. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
I have one final one, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so like when you were determining that a lot of those structures were from the 80s, were you using appearance to kind of make that or gauge that?
I knew.
Oh, okay, yeah, personal
I remember when
experience.
some of them were built.
Okay, yeah.
I just knew.
Alright, that parcel, yeah, I
Yeah.
remember, yeah.
The Hopes lived there, the Rambos lived there. Great addition. Mark Rambo, your uncle, doesn't, I mean, he's totally in one of those houses, probably built in 1976 or so. Something like that.
Pretty nice house too. Like they did really good job in the 70s.
Yeah, so, yeah, it's funny how that worked, yeah. Yeah, and I, I know, so a dot represents a property that has had a date. I know that there's like a whole bunch more properties, and I would continually be going back to Google Maps, just refreshing myself. I'm like, wait, there's a whole bunch of houses on this street still.
Yeah.
And I knew just in my head, because I could picture most of these streets. Sturgis is just small enough where, I mean, I've been on pretty much every street and can picture most of them. It's right on the edge of not quite knowing all of them, but pretty close. But yeah, I totally remember when a number of these outer neighborhoods were built, so I knew from that. Oh, what was one other interesting thing though that was aggravating was any church or government building did not have that information on the Meade County auditor's site because they're tax exempt. And the main purpose of it was to collect taxed and past sale information. So that's another good, probably 20, 25 buildings that I know are, I mean, we have a whole bunch of old churches that are over 100 years old. Not on the map, not in my database. So that'll be another effort. I know we have an ecumenical council. I may have someone speak there and say, hey, would your church like to get one of these plaques? And then same with government buildings, like, well, where our Meade County administration's at is our old Erskine school building. Probably the coolest old building in Sturgis. The big sandstone school building on top of the hill. Grand old building, built 1901, I think. Not in the database, no year online. I know that it's, we all know in Sturgis the year it was built and everything, and it used to house K through 12, the whole district in one building. And when I went through school, it only housed 4th grade. All the 4th grade was there. And today it's a county admin building, which they did a great job restoring that building. It almost makes up for the fact that they tore down our glorious old sandstone courthouse in the 60s. But
Killer.
almost redeems them. Yeah, any other questions? Yeah,
So you're not concerned with the, house being originally historical, but you're more concerned with the date it was created?
so that's interesting. At this point, I'm only concerned about the year it was built, so they can get a plaque. As I go through some of the online photos, there were some surprises. I'm like, that house wasn't built 1900. It looks like something from 1995. And then I'd look at the little floor plan diagram, and it had been added onto and added onto and added onto and resurfaced and did not look historic at all, retained no historic character. If I was creating a historic district, at least in Orlando and I think other areas I've researched, buildings are either contributing structures or non-contributing structures if they're in a historic district. And something like that would be non-contributing. It's lost all of its historic character. Might as well knock it down, who cares, But I'll give them a plaque anyway. Cause I'm not creating a historic district with this. We're just doing the year built, that the original structure was built. And it was pretty common, you know, maybe it was a little log cabin originally, and then it had a lean-to, and then another room, and then a garage, and, you know, that definitely happened. And sometimes it was done in a way that preserved the historic character, and other times it didn't. But I would definitely be concerned about that if I was making a district. And I've seen this happen in Orlando, where a number of neighbors wanted to create a historic district, and the city historic preservation officer, they did some of the research and they're like, we're sorry, there just aren't enough buildings in your neighborhood that have retained the original character. It's not worth it. To make a district, you've got to have a good collection of a lot of buildings that have retained that original historic character. If they've been all changed up, then you can maybe award something to individual houses, like a plaque, but you're not gonna create a district. And districts have protections and rules. And that's hard to get people on board to do that. Even the National Register of Historic Places doesn't really have any teeth to it. There's no rules. We sort of know, we think in society, oh, it's a listed place, it's National Register of Historic Places. We kind of think that they can't change it, which is good. Kind of a good piece of ignorance, if there's such a thing, but there's no real protection from that. But a city historic district, Boulevard and Rapid, you can't just knock down a house, you can't just add on, it's gotta go through approvals and everything. Ours in Orlando, I've had a lot of experience with, I think ours is very reasonable. There are some, like in New England, where they're Nazis about things. I mean, you can't change the color, the interior, anything. But, yeah. Other questions?
We've had a couple of historic places in Piedmont.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we did just what you mentioned, we tore one of them down. But it was slowly deteriorating around us. But one we did save, and it's from the abstract that I have is 1884. It's an early place.
Cool.
You know,
Piedmont is one of the oldest communities in the Black Hills.
2 railroads running out of there.
It only incorporated about, 10 years ago? So it's one of the newest cities in South Dakota.
Oldest city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we owned
it's,
a general store, an old general store building for a number of years. But,
Oh, cool. Yeah.
it just was beyond no foundation.
Yeah.
Slowly settling.
It was the Priest General Store?
The Priest General Store.
Okay, yeah. That's a personal goal of mine with our county historical society, is to get more people involvement.
Yeah.
There is a lot of, not just the physical history, but there's some good recorded history down there in Piedmont.
Yeah, we moved into that place with an outhouse out back and one faucet, no drainage systems, you know, pretty primitive, but
And we're still married.
we paid $5 a month rent for it.
Oh my gosh.
You know, that was 50 years ago.
That was still cheap and.
Oh, ridiculously cheap. The condition of it, you know, probably had a lot to do with the value of what we were paying. Not really, but.
Tilford was another one of our historic communities.
Yeah.
Tilford and Sturgis actually competed to be the county seat of Meade County.
Oh, I didn't know this.
Do any of you, have you ever been in Tilford?
Not much there.
About 4 houses.
One historic building, that general store.
And unfortunately, the other half of the town is where the interstate is at.
See, that kills it.
So, yeah.
Kills it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Thanks, Alex.